better you hit? I can make it. I got to get my rifle from the shed. Remember, downwind. Stay out of sight. I'll be right back. Come, you crazy bastard. Don't move.
448. I have an emergency.
John, I feel good. Just you're a dead man, John.
Imagine a world where the laws of physics are merely suggestions and the anatomy of an action hero is forged from pure industrial steel. In 1985, the cinematic landscape underwent a visceral shift when director Mark L. Lester unleashed a relentless force of nature that would redefine the one-man army subgenre forever. We aren't just looking at a film. We are dissecting a high-octane experiment in mechanical momentum and hyper-masculine visual language. From the friction of a legendary final showdown to the strategic destruction of a silent film-era mansion. This isn't your standard rescue mission. It is a masterclass in 85-minute pacing that strips away the fallout of complex subplots to focus on one thing: pure, unadulterated momentum. Why does a steam pipe through the chest feel like the only logical conclusion? How did a 45-day production sprint create a blueprint that every modern action flick still tries to replicate? Today, we are performing a contextual autopsy on a cult classic that turned Arnold Schwarzenegger into a mythic figure of strategic carnage. We will explore the friction between the steel drum's symphony of the score and the industrial gore on screen, revealing production facts buried under decades of debris. This is the ultimate breakdown of why this specific ending remains the peak of 80s excess, and how every error in logic only adds to its visceral power. Buckle up, because we are moving beyond the surface to explain the strategic genius behind the mayhem. This is Commando. On this channel, we don't just recap. We analyze the mechanical architecture of cinema through the director's lens. To understand the friction of this narrative, you have to understand the strategic choices made on the set in California. From the high-contrast night shoots at the Sherman Oaks Galleria to the visceral fallout of a script tailored specifically for a bodybuilding icon. We are breaking the natural order of the timeline to examine the anatomy of the mission, integrating behind-the-scenes intelligence with a deep dive into the film's unique world-building. We'll explain the reality of the stunts, the psychological friction of the characters, and the legacy of the Valverde trope. By the time we reach the final frame, you will see this isn't just a movie about a kidnapped girl. It's a study in cinematic momentum and the strategic creation of an invincible archetype. Welcome to the master-level breakdown. Let's get to work. The director's lens immediately identifies the final villa siege not as a standard skirmish, but as a strategic display of high-octane hypermasculinity. Matrix initiates the mechanical erasure of Arius' private guard, moving with a momentum that ignores traditional tactical cover. Director Mark L. Lester frames Schwarzenegger against the backdrop of the Harold Lloyd estate, using the sprawling architecture to emphasize the scale of the carnage. Every explosion creates a visceral friction against the serene Beverly Hills landscape, showcasing the visual language of 80s excess. Technical facts reveal that the barracks being destroyed were actually Hearst Castle Beach properties, providing a grid that studio sets couldn't replicate. Notice how the camera tracks Matrix movement through the flora. The director employs a relentless forward momentum, ensuring the viewer feels the fallout of every round fired. This isn't just a rescue mission, it's an anatomy of vengeance where the protagonist functions as a biological weapon. By placing the most intense action in a luxurious state, the film creates a structural irony, the destruction of elite status symbols by a man who has rejected the military machine. The result is a cinematic peak that prioritizes visceral impact over tactical realism, setting the standard for the genre's future. The M202 flash rocket launcher becomes a mechanical extension of his will, clearing the path with a rhythmic intensity that mirrors the James Horner score. Before the mechanical destruction begins, the director establishes the domestic anatomy of John Matrix. We see a montage of seclusion, the feet of a deer, the carrying of a massive log, and the serenity of a mountain home. This sequence isn't filler. It's a strategic choice to establish the Paradise Lost trope. The visual language here emphasizes Matrix's dual nature, a gentle giant whose muscle mass is a tool for both construction and destruction. The fallout of this peaceful introduction occurs when General Kirby arrives with news of the unit's deaths. Director Lester uses soft, natural lighting to contrast with the steely focus that slowly returns to Matrix's eyes. The mechanical error of the villains was assuming that a man could simply retire from his internal anatomy of war. When the assassins attack, the domestic hues are replaced by the high-contrast friction of combat. This turning point proves that Matrix's solitude was never about peace. It was about containing a momentum that, once released, cannot be stopped. The director ensures the audience understands that by kidnapping Jenny, the villains haven't just sparked a fight, they've activated a machine. The anatomy of the mountain cabin, remote and fortified, serves as a physical representation of Matrix's own biological frame, peaceful on the exterior but engineered for high-intensity defense. The narrative momentum accelerates through a mechanical constraint, an 11-hour ticking clock. After being forced onto a flight to Valverde, Matrix performs a visceral act of defiance by neutralizing Henriquez and Riquez, jumping from the wheel well of a departing plane. This scene defies the physics of reality, but adheres perfectly to the logic of the action hero archetype. The director uses a rapid-fire edit to emphasize the urgency, creating a sense of friction between the departing plane and Matrix's descent into the marshland. Production facts highlight the sheer risk of the stunt work here, aimed at establishing Matrix as a man who can navigate any environment through raw mechanical force. The fallout of this jump is the immediate hunt for Sully. Notice the lighting choices as Matrix navigates the airport. It's clinical and cold, mirroring his strategic focus. He isn't just a man on the run. He is a hunter analyzing the anatomy of his prey. The result of the jump is a shift in the movie's pacing, moving from a hostage drama into a relentless car chase momentum that defines the entire second act. The jump represents a total break with the systemic rules of the mission. Matrix literally exits the narrative track provided by the villains to create his own anatomical path to justice. Matrix enlists Cindy, an off-duty flight attendant, but the director's lens treats her not as a damsel, but as a strategic asset who provides the audience's perspective on the insanity. Cindy's initial reaction to Matrix's mechanical brutality is one of visceral shock, providing a much-needed friction to his unstoppable momentum. The director's intent was to use Cindy as a grounding wire, a normal person caught in the fallout of a cinematic war. As they track Sully, the visual language shifts. Cindy's vibrant car becomes a mobile command center, creating a strange aesthetic friction against the gritty urban hues of Los Angeles. Her decision to assist Matrix after witnessing Sully's aggression is the turning point for her character anatomy. She moves from a victim of harassment to a strategic participant in a high-stakes rescue. The mechanical reality of her role is crucial. She handles the logistics and communication, while Matrix provides the visceral force. This partnership subverts the typical 80s trope by making the female lead an active, though terrified, partner in the chaos. The director avoids the mechanical error of a traditional romance, focusing instead on the friction of survival. Cindy's presence forces the movie to acknowledge its own absurdity, creating a visceral loop between the audience and the action. The Sherman Oaks Galleria sequence is a masterclass in the cinematography of public spaces. Shot entirely during a night shift blitz, the director uses the mall's multi-level architecture to create a vertical anatomy for the chase. Matrix's pursuit of Sully through the glass and steel of the atrium level emphasizes his friction with modern society. He is a relic of the jungle navigating a mechanical labyrinth of consumerism. The strategic use of artificial mall lighting creates deep shadows, allowing for a visceral game of cat and mouse. When Matrix performs the legendary Tarzan swing from the upper level, it isn't just a stunt, it's a visual language representing his rejection of the mall's structural rules. He doesn't use the escalators. He cuts through the space with the momentum of a predator. The director's choice to film in a real mall adds an authentic texture to the carnage. As the high-gloss storefronts are shattered by gunfire and physical combat, the result is a sequence that remains one of the most iconic displays of 80s action pacing. The anatomy of the mall, with its clean lines and bounds, commercial excess, is the perfect friction point for a character who operates purely on primal momentum. Every shattered window is a visceral rejection of the 80s consumerist dream. The friction between Matrix and the henchman Sully reaches its fallout on a desolate cliffside. This is where we see the mechanical brutality of the Matrix archetype in full effect. After a high-speed, momentum-driven chase, Matrix suspends Sully over a precipice by his ankle. The anatomy of this interrogation is pure power. It's not about negotiation. It's about the visceral threat of gravity. Director Mark L. Lester focuses on the steely gaze of Schwarzenegger, emphasizing the strategic lack of emotion. When Matrix reminds Sully of his earlier promise to kill him last, and then simply states, "I lied," he isn't being a villain, he is being an efficient machine. The drop is a decisive result that cleanses the narrative of a minor obstacle, so the momentum can shift to the next target, Cook. This moment redefined the 80s hero's moral anatomy. They weren't just good guys. They were visceral executioners of those who threatened their legacy. The fallout of Sully's death is the acquisition of the motel key, the next mechanical clue in the hunt for Jenny. The director utilizes the geography of the cliff to emphasize the literal edge Matrix is operating on. There is no room for systemic mercy in his strategic anatomy. In the director's lens, the surplus store break-in is the film's mechanical apex. This isn't just about obtaining tools. It's a strategic gear-up montage that functions as a visual fetish for weaponry. Matrix systematically analyzes the anatomy of the store, selecting claymores, M60s, and grenades with a visceral focus. The lighting is low-key, emphasizing the steel and oil of the equipment. This sequence creates a ritualistic momentum, preparing the protagonist's biological frame for the transition back into a war machine. The director uses close-up shots of hands loading magazines and priming explosives to build a rhythmic friction. The fallout of this scene occurs when the police intervene, leading to a mechanical error in Matrix's plan, his arrest. However, notice the cinematography here. Even in handcuffs, Matrix retains an imposing visual language. Cindy's subsequent use of the rocket launcher to flip the police van is a turning point that highlights the film's commitment to strategic escalation. The result is a transition from an urban hunt to a full-scale amphibious assault on Arias's island. This gear-up is a visceral rite of passage, transforming Matrix from a father in a green t-shirt into the anatomy of the ultimate commando. General Arias represents the archetypal South American dictator, a recurring friction in 80s action cinema. The director frames Arias within the high-status hues of his island villa, creating a mirage of political power that Matrix is destined to shatter. Arias isn't just a villain, he's the structural motivation for the mission's anatomy. His desire to reclaim Valverde through a military coup reflects the era's interventionist worldview. Director Lester emphasizes the psychological friction between Arias' refined demeanor and the industrial gore of his mercenaries. Arias believes his strategic positioning and private army provide security, but he fails to account for the visceral momentum of a father with nothing to lose. During their brief interactions, the visual language pits Arias's delusions of grandeur against Matrix's steely reality. The fallout of Arias's overconfidence is the total erasure of his forces, proving that political status is no match for the mechanical force of the one-man army. Arias represents the systemic rot that Matrix's raw anatomy is designed to purge. The final gunfight between them is less a duel of equals and more the inevitable result of a mechanical collision between a fading dictator and a rising force of nature. The motel confrontation between Matrix and Cook is a masterclass in fight choreography friction. We see a clash of styles, Cook's speed and Green Beret training versus Matrix raw mechanical power. The director uses the confined anatomy of the motel room to heighten the visceral impact of every strike. Every piece of furniture becomes a strategic object of destruction, emphasizing the fallout of their shared military history. Notice the sound design here. The thud of impacts creates a visceral rhythm that James Horner's score expertly complements. The fight concludes with a brutal mechanical result, Matrix impaling Cook on a table leg. This isn't just a kill, it's a statement on the anatomy of the mission. Matrix doesn't have time for a lengthy interrogation, he needs immediate results. The friction of this brawl establishes that even the most elite soldiers are merely speed bumps in Matrix's relentless forward momentum. The director's use of high-contrast lighting in the cramped motel room creates a gritty anatomy of violence, where every frame feels like a mechanical failure of the human body. Cook's death is the final visceral hurdle before the transition to the island climax. The car chase through the hills of Benedict Canyon is a study in momentum and mechanical error. Matrix, driving Cindy's small vehicle, pursues Sully's sleek yellow car with a total disregard for the laws of physics. The director employs wide angles to capture the high-speed friction between the vehicles and the winding canyon roads. The visual language here is about the anatomy of the pursuit, the predator closing in on the prey. A technical fact from the production notes that this sequence was shot on location, providing a visceral grit that backlot filming lacks. When the chase reaches its climax, the fallout is a spectacular mechanical failure as Sully's car flips. The director focuses on the smoldering wreckage, using the fire to create a high-contrast hue against the night sky. Matrix emerging from the shadows to confront the trapped Sully is the ultimate strategic result of the chase, setting the stage for the cliffside drop that follows. The anatomy of Cindy's car, damaged and missing a door, becomes a metaphor for the visceral state of Matrix himself, broken in form but still operating with perfect strategic momentum. Bennett is the film's most complex psychological friction, brought to life by Vernon Wells' iconic, over-the-top performance. Director Mark L. Lester intentionally played up the love-hate anatomy between Bennett and Matrix, creating a visceral subtext that borders on the homoerotic. Bennett's chainmail vest and, well, mustache are more than just 80s fashion. They are part of a visual language expressing his obsession with his former commander. The mechanical friction between them is palpable in every scene. Bennett doesn't just want Matrix dead, he wants Matrix to acknowledge him, to see him as an equal in war. This obsession leads to a strategic error. Bennett allows his ego to dictate the final fight instead of simply using his firearm. The fallout of this choice is the legendary Boiler Room Showdown. The director ensures the viewer feels the heat and steam, creating a visceral atmosphere for their final mechanical encounter. Bennett's performance provides the necessary anatomical counterpoint to Matrix. Where Matrix is industrial and steely, Bennett is erratic and visceral. Their friction is the soul of the film's third act, leading to the ultimate mechanical erasure of the past. Valverde is a fictional South American mirage that serves as the perfect backdrop for the mission's anatomy. The director uses this setting to explore 80s political hues, where the fallout of Cold War tension manifests in local coups and mercenary armies. By creating a fictional nation, the production avoids specific diplomatic friction, while still leaning into the visceral reality of 80s foreign policy tropes. The visual language of Valverde is defined by tropical hues, lush greens and bright sun, which Matrix systematically stains with the fire and steel of his arsenal. The director's intent was to create a South American atmosphere using the rugged California coastline, a strategic set choice that allows for maximum destruction. The result is a world that feels dangerous and lawless, justifying the visceral force Matrix must employ to ensure the legacy of his daughter's safety. Valverde is the mechanical laboratory where the film tests the limits of the one-man army's anatomy. Every explosion in this fictional landscape reinforces the strategic worldview of the era. That one resolute man can solve the friction of global instability through raw momentum. The final assault on the Hearst Castle Beach properties is a logistics marvel. The director took these high-status structures and transformed them into the anatomy of a military outpost. The visual language here is one of total structural erasure. The serene beach environment is consumed by the fallout of grenades and the end. Machine gun fire. Matrix moves through the space like a mechanical reaper, his momentum turning every building into a funeral pyre for Arius's army. Notice the strategic placement of extras and ad. Pyrotechnics. The director ensures the frame is always filled with the visceral reality of combat. The mechanical force of Matrix is emphasized by his choice of weapons, specifically the M60, which he fires from the hip with an anatomy of pure power. The result is a sequence that defines the Commando legacy, a relentless display of one-man army dominance that leaves the luxury estate in a state of smoldering mechanical ruin. The contrast between the high society architecture and the industrial gore of the battle is the film's most visceral statement on the anatomy of 80s action. The director rejects the systemic rules of military engagement in favor of a total mechanical onslaught. James Horner's musical score provides a unique sonic anatomy to the film, primarily through the strategic use of steel drums. This choice creates a fascinating friction against the industrial gore and mechanical violence on screen. The steel drums provide a tropical hue that roots the action in the Valverde mirage, even when the violence is at its most visceral. The director's lens notes that the score's rhythm mirrors the film's pacing momentum. During high-tension sequences, the percussion accelerates, adding a mechanical urgency to Matrix movements. When the action reaches its peak, the music swells, creating a sonic fallout that heightens the audience's adrenaline. This isn't just background noise, it's a strategic component of the film's visual language, ensuring the viewer is fully immersed in the visceral reality of the one-man army's mission. The score avoids the mechanical error of standard orchestral swells, choosing instead an anatomy of sound that feels both exotic and industrial. Wall. This sonic friction is what gives Commando its unique atmospheric hue, separating it from the generic fallout of other 80s action clones. Stephen E. D'Souza's script was meticulously tailored to the specific anatomy of a Schwarzenegger performance. The director's lens reveals that the famous one-liners aren't just for levity. They function as a strategic rhythmic device. Every quip delivered after a kill acts as a mechanical punctuation mark, signaling the successful result of a tactical maneuver. This creates a visceral pacing where the audience is conditioned to anticipate the verbal fallout as much as the physical destruction. The visual language of these moments often involves a close-up on Matrix's face, catching the high-contrast lighting that emphasizes his steely features. This dialogue strategy creates a friction between the grim reality of the mission and the heightened, almost mythic, persona of the hero. By making Matrix both a lethal machine and a dry wit, the production avoids the mechanical error of becoming too dour. The result is a hero anatomy that feels uniquely Schwarzenegger, a blend of unstoppable momentum and charismatic detachment that would define action cinema for the next decade. These one-liners represent the mechanical triumph of the hero over his environment, proving that his strategic anatomy remains unaffected by the surrounding visceral chaos. The final confrontation between Matrix and Bennett in the boiler room is the film's visceral climax. The director uses the industrial hues of the setting, hissing steam and glowing orange lights, to create an atmosphere of extreme friction. The anatomy of the fight is a struggle for dominance that ends in a legendary mechanical result. Matrix rips a steam pipe from the wall and hurls it with enough momentum to impale Bennett against a furnace. The ending-explained aspect of this scene is found in the fallout of Bennett's obsession. Matrix uses the environment as a strategic extension of his own biological force. The line "let off some steam, Bennett" is the ultimate visceral punctuation. It serves as a symbolic release of the tension built up throughout the narrative. The physics of the death are impossible, but in the visual language of 1985, it is the only logical conclusion to a story about a man who has become an industrial force. This mechanical erasure of his former rival is the decisive turning point that allows Matrix to finally reclaim the legacy of his daughter. The boiler room anatomy, with its raw energy and high-pressure steam, is the perfect theater for this final visceral fallout. As the fallout of the island siege settles, General Kirby arrives with a full military detachment, representing the structural weight of the government Matrix once served. The director's lens focuses on the friction between Matrix's battle-worn appearance and Kirby's clean uniform. Kirby's request for Matrix to rejoin the unit is met with a strategic rejection. This was the last time. This moment is the thematic anatomy of the entire film. The visual language of Matrix walking away, holding Jenny and flanked by Cindy, signifies a total departure from the mechanical life of a soldier. He has used the military's own tools to dismantle a dictator's army, only to discard those tools once his personal legacy, his family, is secure. The director's intent was to show that Matrix momentum was never fueled by patriotism, but by a visceral protective instinct. By boarding the seaplane and leaving the military detachment behind, the protagonist effectively erases his status as a weapon of the state, choosing the anatomy of a father over the momentum of a colonel. This rejection is the ultimate strategic result of the mission. It is the moment Matrix restores his own individual anatomy. The visceral energy of Commando is a direct result of its relentless production momentum. Wrapping the entire project in just 45 days, forced a strategic focus on pacing and high-voltage action. Director Mark L. Lester didn't have the luxury of overanalyzing subplots. Instead, he focused on the anatomy of the mission. This created a film with zero fluff, where every scene serves the forward momentum of the 11-hour clock. The mechanical error in many modern action films is excessive exposition, a friction that this film avoids through its rapid-fire production cycle. Every lighting choice and camera move had to be decisive. The result is a visceral experience that feels like a single, continuous burst of energy. This production fact explains why the movie feels so lean, efficient. It is a mechanical reflection of the director's lens, working under extreme time constraints. The fallout of this sprint is a cult classic that remains a masterclass in how to maintain cinematic momentum without losing the visceral impact of the stunts. The 45-day window meant that the anatomy of the film remained focused and intense, mirroring the mission-oriented anatomy of Matrix himself. The visual influence of Commando creates a long-term legacy in the anatomy of the one-man army genre. We can see the strategic fallout of this film in modern hits like John Wick and Taken, where a highly skilled protagonist is reactivated by a personal crisis. The director's lens identifies this film as the moment the action hero became a visceral archetype of unstoppable mechanical force. The anatomy of the Schwarzeneggerization of action meant that heroes no longer needed to be vulnerable. They needed to be strategic. The friction between the hero's domestic peace and his industrial-scale violence became a blueprint for decades of fallout. Commando proved that audiences didn't need complex political paradoxes. They needed a visceral result, delivered with momentum and charisma. The legacy of the film's visual language, from the gear-up montage to the final one-liner, remains a mechanical standard by which all high-octane action is still measured. Every modern retired killer narrative owes its structural anatomy to the friction created by Matrix in 1985. The film is a visceral testament to the enduring power of a focused narrative momentum and a resolute protagonist frame. The final frame of the movie returns us to the seaplane, a mechanical symbol of escape and freedom. The ending, explained through a director's lens, reveals that the mission was never just about a rescue. It was about the anatomy of a man reclaiming his right to be normal. The visceral reality of the villa's destruction is the friction required to buy that peace. Matrix, Jenny, and Cindy are no longer defined by the military machine, but by their shared survival. The sound of James Horner's steel drums returns, providing a rhythmic hue that feels triumphant rather than tense. The final result is a restoration of the legacy Matrix sought in the opening frames. While the logic of the action may be fueled by mechanical error and impossible physics, the emotional anatomy is sound. The visceral journey from the secluded cabin back to a life of peace proves that the ultimate strategic objective wasn't the death of Arius, but the preservation of the family. As they fly into the horizon, the momentum of the mission finally hits zero, leaving behind a smoldering mechanical wreckage and a hero who has finally earned his rest. The final hue of the sunset against the seaplane is the ultimate visual language of success. The machine has finished its task and can now return to the anatomy of a human. This is the enduring legacy of Commando, a visceral, mechanical, and strategic masterpiece that transformed 80s excess into a timeless cinematic anatomy of power and purpose. Through the director's lens, we see that every broken window, every fired rocket, and every impaled villain was a necessary friction point in the restoration of a father's world. The fallout of the mission is not just a body count, but the restoration of the hero's biological frame to a state of peace. Matrix has moved from the anatomy of the colonel back to the anatomy of the protector. concluding the film's relentless momentum on a visceral high note, we have successfully performed the contextual autopsy on this 1985 classic, revealing the mechanical architecture that makes it a cornerstone of action cinema history. The mission is complete.